The gentleman said that the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, continuously said that they were willing to negotiate, and that the reason that there has not been successful negotiations is because of the position that has been taken by Hanoi, that they will not come to the negotiating table. Therefore, what step would I take to bring North Vietnamese to the negotiating table? Is that correct?
That's correct.
First, let me say that in 1965 and 66, the North Vietnamese had 4 points that they said that the United States had to accept. One of the points was the withdrawal of American troops from South Vietnam before they were discussed, before they would go to negotiating. Another point was the recognition of the National Liberation Front as the sole government of South Vietnam. Now, these, of course, were unacceptable points to us. Yet in 1966, we stopped the bombing for 36 days to see if they would go to the negotiating table. They refused to, I believe it was early 1966, they refused to go to the negotiating table at that time. The North Vietnamese, still holding out their points, still requiring us to give in on those points before they would come to the negotiating table. We stopped the bombing for 36 days in order to try to get them to come to the negotiating table. That was not successful. Vice President Humphrey and Secretary Russ said we stopped the bombing in order to get them to come to the negotiating table. We were willing to take that step. At the end of 1966, Pham Van Dong and Ho Chi Minh, Pham Van Dong in an interview with Rfk, Foreign Minister, in an interview with the Australian correspondent Rfk, said that they were dropping their 4 points, that America wanted to sign, they were dropping their 4 points, and they could come to the negotiating table if the United States would stop the bombing. Mr. Kosygin in February of 1967 went to London, and he said that he was certain in a televised program, he said that he was certain that the North Vietnamese would come to the negotiating table if they stopped the bombing. He was asked at that time whether the North Vietnamese were dropping the 4 points, and he said that they were dropping the 4 points. And the Rfk later on explained in his interview that the Foreign Minister of North Vietnam had said they were dropping the 4 points as a preliminary prerequisite to negotiations. I thought in February of 1967 we should have gone to the negotiating table and accepted their offer. We refused to do that at that time. We sent a message that went to Hanoi while Kosygin was in London, which went to Hanoi in February, around February 8th or February 12th. There's some question as to when it was written and when it arrived, but during that period of time, in which we said, which was a well-written letter, but which it said which demanded almost in fact an unconditional surrender by the North Vietnamese. What it said was, we will stop the bombing. In substance, what it said was, we will stop the bombing after we know that you have stopped the infiltration into the South. Now, we were going to continue to send, we said nothing about continuing to send our own men and materials into the South. They had men and materials into the South, and in addition, they were supplying materials into the South. If they stopped supplying every man and material,
Possible upcoming urban crisis.
well, I think first we haven't, the question was, what would I do? What do I think should be done, really, about the urban crisis? First, we haven't done anything in facing it. We haven't done anything since we had the riots last summer. And everybody's talked about the fact that we can predict riots again this summer, because we haven't done anything. And the conditions in most of these cities is worse now than it was last summer. So I don't think that we can expect that they're going to go just disappear. We strengthen the police department so that they're better equipped to deal with some of the problems. I think that we have to make it clear that we cannot tolerate lawlessness, violence, or disorder, and that we should take whatever police action is necessary to deal with it. That's number one. But closely related to that, and part of it, because it's not just suppression, is to give people an opportunity. And one of the major areas of opportunity is to give people a job. Gives them some work to do. As I say, you move away from the welfare system and find employment for them. And if we can't do it through the private sector, I would do it through the government. But I would provide jobs for people. And as I said, I would give tax incentives and tax credits to business to go in and just
had a question to you. It's for their benefit, for their use. This is sort of a program. Okay.
And they really gave me a real look. And one of them said, "We'll get them later." I don't think I would have survived in this country 100 years ago. Do you think? I would have got a cut. Oh, well, it's not worth repeating, so I'll stop. I know that the field is complex, but I also believe there is one single cause of our dilemma. We have not planned Indian education to benefit the Indian himself. We have ignored his culture, we have ignored his own desires, we have ignored the consequences of our own decisions, and we have constructed an unresponsive system which educates the Indian child in name only and not in fact. And I don't believe that is satisfactory. It's one of my complaints about our educational system for the Indian child. I think we constructed, and one of my reservations about the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I do not mean to be offensive to anybody here or to any bureau or any individual, but I think too frequently the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as well as the educational system for Indians generally, has been constructed for those who are doing the educating, and not for the Indian child. I think we've ignored the Indian child. I think if all of us kept in mind what the purpose of education is, and what the purpose of Indian children's education is, it's to help the child. It's not to expand the bureaucracy. It's not to make more comfortable jobs for everybody. It's to help the child. And I think we've ignored that. And I think we've forgotten it. And I think it's a good lesson for us to remember for the future. Consider just for a moment the structure of Indian boarding schools. To begin with, they are with boarding schools, so we're going to continue the boarding schools. I'd like to have the Bureau of Indian Affairs sit down for 24 hours and think of a new system, and then come to Congress and come to the American people. But this separation divides more than child and family. It divides the child from his culture as well. The craft, the music, the language, the heritage of his ancestors, these priceless attributes are forever lost to this child, who is taught in a distant environment by men who know too little about the culture of the Navajo. Moreover, there is often no attempt made by the authorities to keep the child in communication with his home. Parents are discouraged from visits because there's no place near the school where they can stay. Children stay in school all day, every day of the week, under the guidance of well-intentioned men who simply lack the time and the funds to give the child any sense of individual worth or any of the attention that he should receive or would receive at home. It's a completely unsatisfactory system, and it shouldn't be continued. That's the kind of system they have, and that's why we're different. But the fact is, that's the system that we've established for Indian children in the United States. Just as bad as any other that I've seen as I've traveled in the Soviet Union or Communist China, of taking a child from the home and sending them off to an alien environment. Frequently, these children don't know how to speak English. They're taken from their homes and sent off to these boarding schools. Thus, the Navajo boarding schools, all too often, commit the worst possible error. They crush the spirit of the child that they were meant, that the purpose of the construction of the school in the first place was to educate. Crowded into huge schools, the child simply has no sense that anyone cares, no sense that anyone is listening, and no sense that effort is worthwhile. As one teacher put it when he talked to me, unless we understand what they want, and more important, unless we give to them the power to shape their own education, and not think just some white men sitting in Washington have all the answers for Indian education. Let's turn the Indian education over to the Indians. An effective program will not be won by continuing to run unproductive boarding schools. No. So what are the elements of some of this program? First is a commitment of the full resources necessary for educational excellence. Resources of money, of personnel, and of services. This requires new teachers. Respect for oneself begins with respect for one's parents and one's heritage. But a boy cannot respect a father who has nothing to say about the way his son is reared. And there can be little respect for one's heritage when the values of another culture are forced upon and overbear your own life. I believe, therefore, that the time has come for the voice of the Indian community, the voice of the Navajo tribe, and other tribes to be heard here in the United States.
We have a consultant staff here made up of experts with a great deal of experience in such emotionally disturbed child and problems of curriculum and planning in the schools, dedicated to encouraging the schools and helping the schools to develop new programs and put innovation into the programs. And I know that Larry and the staff is very proud of this aspect of the program. They have in-service teacher training projects going on several reservations in northern Arizona.
This is Bill. Please, nice to meet you.
This is Mr. Leo Munoz, Senator. He is a behavioral psychologist specializing in the problems of Indian children and other minority groups who are having learning difficulties and behavioral problems and this type of thing. It's been a fun addition to staff.
Thank you, Jim.
It was the initiative of Senator Fannin that established our Committee on Indian Education. He was greatly interested, I know, as governor of the state, and he's been very, very committed to this subject since he's been in the Senate of the United States. I think between Senator Fannin and Senator Harris of Oklahoma, more has been done, more effort has been made, and Senator McGovern, I think, South Dakota, more effort's been made on behalf of the Indians, our fellow citizens, than at any other previous time. We recognize our special responsibility to the first citizens. We recognize also that we haven't met that obligation. We've had treaty obligations, made treaties and promises to the Indians, and the fact is that we have not kept them. And we are here to examine into the subject to see whether we can make some suggestions and recommendations not only to the legislative branch of the government, but to the executive branch of the government as well, to improve the education of the Indian child. The statistics show quite clearly how we have failed. 65% of the Indian children dropping out from school, a high unemployment rate in many parts of the United States amongst Indians, a feeling of hopelessness and despair amongst Indian children. And we have not done what we should have done to encourage the Indian child to improve his education, to increase his educational possibilities, to go on to a university, go on to a college,
and be the lawyers, the doctors, the engineers, and the teachers that they are capable of being. The whole history and the culture of the Indian here in the United States has shown that they can take on this position of leadership, take on a position of direction and responsibility. And it's by the fact that we have failed the Indian child that he has not, in some cases, in many areas, lived up to his potential. We want to rectify that, and both Senator Fannin and I are committed to that. I am sorry that I personally have missed the last 2 days of hearings. We had scheduled some hearings, and then something came up, such as my running for president. So I have been involved in that endeavor. At times I want to assure you that I'd rather be with the Indians, and but I also feel that although I want to do all that I can as chairman of the subcommittee on Indian education, that I think it's very likely that I could do more for the Indians as President of the United States. But in any case, whatever it might be. I'm delighted to be here with my colleague, and I just give that as an explanation as to why I haven't been here for the full period of hearings, but how interested I am, and I know how much Senator Fannin has accomplished by proceeding with the hearings. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the witnesses, and I'm pleased to be in the state of my
of the Navajo people. Victims of Indian students.
Kennedy and Senator Fannin. Yes, I am not authorized to sit here and make some kind of a statement, but I think as Indians that are sitting here, I think we have a great interest in so-called education. So I don't see why I have to speak for so many minutes. Since I'm a problem of the United States government, I think I need to be looked at in the eyes and see how fast I could become one of the citizens, and where I'll be appreciated and know that I'm among the fellow Americans. I would say that what I would recommend would be that in order to make this change, as Senator Kennedy have stated in the last night's banquet, and also he has said that there ought to be a change. I know that will not take place overnight, because these boarding schools that our Navajo children are attending, which some of them I think needs to be looked into very carefully, because some of them are very useful. And then some of them, of course, needs to maybe liquidated to a certain extent. And I would recommend to our problems. And I think that should be done an independent group, or whether it's from your office and some educators that are really sincere. And the problem is we haven't made very much a success in all this education, and this is our 100th year.
Why do you think that is? I agree with that.
Well,
we all agree it's been a failure, but what is the reason?
Well, there's the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I read that. The reason why I say the Bureau of Indian Affairs is some of us look at this scene of all the years that has gone by. Ever since the treaty was made with the Navajo tribe, and the Navajo people agreed that every 30th child will have a teacher. There was the agreement made by the government and the Navajo people. And that hasn't been met for so long, and of course, I don't think it has been met to the extent where it's appreciated. And it has been done by force.
What do you mean by that?
That means the reason why I say by force is a superintendent was placed for the Indians to force that the Indian be educated. Of course, that force is 100 years old now. And we'd like to get to the point where the Indians, I'm talking about the Indians, which including the Navajos, that it's about time that we get ourselves involved and plan some of this education, plan what is needed for our Navajo children to better themselves. I think we need to get ourselves involved. If we're going to have a successful community, I think a school should be within the community, and the community could be developed around this particular area. The reason why I'm saying this, I have a heartache today. At Clagato, that's where I'm from, there was an old Bureau community school there for years and years. My people voted it not to abandon it. We did everything we can not to abandon that school, because that's where the morals of the parents were. But it's abandoned. And, of course, the excuse is no water. But Clagato means water in the ground. And there's a good example. There's a community left with no school, and the kids were sent away to 50 miles, to Toye and to Greasewood and to somewhere else, which are miles away. And the parents don't see their children like they're supposed to. And there's where the family relation is a big gap. So I think the community should have a school within the area where they can develop around it. so the Indians would know that there is an education they can depend to, they know that there's an education that their children are at, they know where their children are. At the moment, the Bureau schools goes up only to a certain grade, let's say to the 5th grade, which I think is a shame. I think these schools that are located at the present, I don't know. Well,
you could tell us in the Indian language, couldn't I?
well, I don't think we're after that how we are treated in the past. I believe that should be, let it be the past. Of course, there are some treatment yet, but I think we should be looking forward to some of the good things that needs to come. Another thing that I'm very much concerned about is the civil service regulation, talking about treatment. So I'm going to answer your question now the best I know how, talking about treatment.
I thought you might get around.
I would recommend very strongly that some of this civil service regulation be looked into. Maybe there ought to be some changes in it. For this reason, we have so-called civil service employees, which of course are theirs. Maybe there are other kinds of civil service employees, but I'm talking about Bureau of Indian Affairs now. I'm going to give you a good example. Over at Steamboat, which is on the Navajo Reservation, they had a problem with a bureau school. And there were certain personnel, the top official, the top echelon, which means the superintendent, the supervisors, and the principal, and so forth. A community didn't like this particular individuals. They were unfair to the children, they were unfair to the employees, they were unfair to the community in a certain way. So they recommend that they have a big gathering, which we usually do, which we call chapter houses. A chapter organization, we have a chapter meeting there, and we call this grassroots organization. And so if they don't feel like that they should have a certain personnel running that school or trying to teach their children some kind of an education, if they have a certain discrimination or don't have some kind of maybe they think, well, these are Indian kids, we can march them around anytime we want to. But that shouldn't be the feeling. So they vote.
Senator Kennedy is presiding over these hearings not as a candidate for president, but as a... Senator Kennedy is presiding over these hearings not as a candidate for president, but as the chairman of a Senate subcommittee on Indian education. But the two roles blend happily here in Arizona, which has the highest population of Indians and Indian voters of any state in the country. Kennedy made it clear that he regards the plight of the American Indian as another failure of the Great Society. Senator Kennedy visited Indian reservations, schools, and orphanages, carrying the message that if he becomes president, there will be no forgotten American. This is Bob Clark in Arizona.